Okay, so I finished the setup for EU. Some Turks down here and a couple here. Turks actually have a pretty big army. One of the things the expansion, the first extension, added was this Grand Vizier counter. It's kind of cool because he gives you a siege bonus, but he's a really bad leader. He's a 2-1-2, and the numbers generally range from 0 to 6, but most leaders don't have it less than a 1. So he's less well ranked, and he's in their counter mix for every turn than most of these guys who are kind of iffy normal leaders. He's also got a higher rank than any of them. And what's particularly disturbing is that there's some leaders who are named leaders with a lower rank than the Grand Vizier. The Grand Vizier is in the game every turn, and leadership in EU is kind of weird. The rules for the leaders are the highest ranked leader has to be on top of the biggest stack of units. And it sort of goes so on from there. There's a little bit of fudging you can do. So if you have an A leader, he has to be on your biggest stack. If you have a B leader, he has to be on your next biggest stack, but he could be in command of a portion of the bigger stack. At least that's how I read it. So you can hide some of your leaders. But in general, you have to use the leaders that historically were used in command positions, for good or ill. Well, this guy isn't really historical, but he serves as kind of a cap to what the biggest stack of Turkish units can be. At first I thought, oh, that's so cool, that's great. You know, they got an extra leader, but he's really a penalty leader. On the other side, we've got one particular guy who comes in on turns 40 to 43 and is very, very dirty because this counter is always in play. That's a shame, too. Okay. Thing I want to look at in general is kind of the setup that I chose and the victory conditions that I chose for the first period. Now remember, these victory conditions don't really matter. I mean, victory points, etc. in this game are such an unimportant factor. But assuming you're playing to win, and several of the players have a good chance of being in the ordering, you do want to make good choices here, and you do want to pursue them. Unfortunately, some of the choices in there I found very, very, very difficult and not particularly worth the payoff to choose. And that mixes up with the unbalance and everything else to make you kind of, oh, what do I care about these? I'll just follow the events. And the events are going to provide a lot of points too. So for the English are desiring to have Scotland and vassal, which they actually start off with, for at least half the turns of this period. That's only 3 turns. And for that, they're going to get 15 points, but if they fail, they lose 10. Okay, they also want 4 manufacturing chits. That's a hard goal to reach, 4 points of manufacturing. Because I think, well, they have 3 already, so, but I don't know if that's 3 counters. I have to look at that. That may be a really hard goal to reach. They want no revolts in Ireland. Now, that's worth 2 points and 0 if they fail. And they want to keep Calais, which is worth 1 point, but lose 5 if they fail. They have 2 more that they had penalties on, which is Gascony and Guyane, which I almost always choose to discard. There's almost no way that England's going to get a peace from France that's going to give them those territories. England's army, technologically, is behind the French one significantly. The French are up here. And the English army is down here. Navally, they're doing fine. Okay. So those are really desirable, but they seem so difficult, even with the Spanish alliance, to fight France. Better to concentrate on your economy. Okay, the French. The French also want Calais. They're 20 minus 10 for that. They want Artois from Spain. 10 minus 10. They get 1 point per commercial fleet minus they have per year. Big bonus of this one, it doesn't come with a penalty. Sometimes you're picking things to prevent yourself from losing too many points in a turn, quite often. And then any new provinces, they're going to get 2. They've got a penalty if they don't become sole defender of the Catholic faith. The way that would require them to have the papacy on their track for half the period at least. Or for them to convince the Spaniards, for example, to become Protestant. Spain already has them. Diplomacy is a pain in the butt. France doesn't want to compete in that. They're going to take that -5 penalty. For Portugal, they're going to set up a colony over in Goa, which they don't even know exists, over here. They've got all kind of special bonuses for this. But those bonuses can only be triggered on the 6th turn of this 6-turn period. So there is some risk there. That's a 15 -5. They want to keep Tangiers. They want colonies and trading posts. They get points for those. And they want the Treaty of Tordesillas to go into effect. That's pretty much, they're hoping a random event that's very likely to happen happens. But they take a penalty if that fails. What they did not take that causes some penalties is Morocco as a vassal and a commercial monopoly in the Irish Sea. That latter one, Morocco, I mean, getting a different religion as your vassal, that's pretty much impossible. So that would require an expenditure of tremendous size from Portugal that they just don't have. Getting the commercial zone monopoly is a possibility, but there are a lot of people here, so they'd have to do competitions with them, and that's a pain in the butt. They think this is the more likely thing. They'll still probably try for this because they take a -10 if they don't get it. For Spain, they want that sole defender of the Catholic faith again. And they have the Pope, so they're going to go for it, thinking they have more money and power to be able to do it. That may not be the case. That's a 25 -20 if they don't get it. They want no French in Italy. That includes vassal states. You could say, well, that's pretty easy. There are no French in Italy. Yeah, but there's a couple events in the first period, and you don't really know this until you've looked at them or played it, that bring the French into desires in Italy. This was when their adventures were going on. For each province they have in Italy, they get 3 points. Right now they have 2, 3, 4, but they're hoping to get more, in particular Milan, and maybe something else. But they currently have a lot, so that seems like a good deal. Each colony in the Americas, they're going to get 1 point for. And obviously they don't know about the Americas yet. But this is one of their big advantages. Okay, Turkey. Turkey wants to wipe the Mamluks out. That's their biggie. 30 -20. Historically, they didn't do it this quickly, but kind of worked it out so that that's possible to get that in ahead of time. They also want to get the Knights of Rhodes off of Rhodes. That's going to be harder. I've never managed that in this first period, but I'm always over-optimistic. They get 10 points and lose 15 for that. Each vassal in Europe is worth 2 points. They start out with a couple of them in terms of Moldavia and Wallachia. They're unlikely to get any others, but they're lessening their penalty. And each Muslim vassal is going to be worth 2. And those are mainly the North Africans, but they could pick something else. And then if they don't have a monopoly in their country's zone, they're going to lose 3 points. Oh, Venice. Venice is in direct opposition. Their first pick, they want the Mamluks to be free. That's 20 -10 for them. Now, there's 2 ways to go with this. One is, the Turks just aren't going to be able to take them out. The other is, I'm Venice. I have some interest here in Hellas and Albania. I'm going to take picks that put me in direct conflict with the Turks. Personally, I don't think Venice can win that game. They can try to play it, but I don't think they want to make those picks. So they didn't here. Instead, they went with commerce, lessening their penalties. They'll get 1 per minus fleet that they commercial fleet that they have. Provinces in Italy, they get 3 per. Well, they've got a couple to begin with. So they'll take those. Each vassal is worth 1. Do they expect to get any vassals? No, they're just dropping their penalties. And their penalties, Hellas -8 and Albania -5 if they don't pick those up. Alright, guess we'll try to get through a little bit more in this vid before I put things up. Okay, well, let's start things off. The first thing in the turn is the Monarch survival phase. Now, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail than I usually do because I didn't explain the rules. But what we've got here, grab this die, because we're going to be using a D10 for this. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking each Monarch in turn in order to see if they survive. And I roll a D10. Remember, these guys have a date that they will die by. In some cases, it's next turn, but they could die earlier. And that's what's happening here. And even on the first turn, you check this. You roll a D10 and you add some modifiers. In this case, the only modifier that's going to come into play is the stability of the country. One country, Venice, has a possibility of, well, has a penalty, a +1 to their die roll. If I roll a 10 or more on any of these dice, the Monarch dies, and we have to roll up a new one. So we'll start with Spain. I have their card up, and they're fine, which is good because otherwise the special rule that gives them initiative no matter what would come into play. Venice, they're fine, even with the modifier. England, Portugal, Turkey, France, and the Netherlands is not in this game. Okay, so I've checked everyone, and nobody's had a problem. Now we have to do the initiative selection. And in this case, in this particular scenario, the majority of countries are at monarchs with a rating of 20. Spain has a higher rating, but Venice, for example, has a 20. Nearly everyone does. England does not. So a lot of them are tied, and I just do a roll-off. And I'll come back in a moment after I see that order, and then we'll cut this video and go to another one, I think. So at some time earlier I mentioned I think the order is simply the order of the initiative, that you don't have choices, and that is indeed the case. So Spain's going first, Portugal's next, then Turkey, Venice, France, and finally England has to go last. There may be some disadvantages to going early, but it's no big deal. Now, I note this to myself because there are no counters to keep track of it on the board. And in a real game, you'd probably write these down on paper like I'm writing pretty much everything down on paper. I'm going to write the turn year down and then information that applies to it, because there's a lot of information that there's no place to keep track of. You just really have to kind of have somebody scribe this information each turn, because there's just, you know, so much complexity. Likewise, as a reminder for the rules, I've gone through the rules, this was sometime long ago, and noted some key years where special stuff is going to happen. So for example, here in 1615, tobacco and sugar comes into play. Galleys, I think, gain their bonus in 1615, or maybe lose their bonus and get boned in 1665. I'm not sure which way that goes. Galleys in the Mediterranean and maybe the Baltic have advantages fighting against the bigger ships early in the game. I think they lose their bonus, actually. Okay, now, and just all kinds of little events there. I probably haven't caught them all. Some of these automatics, for example, maneuver, you can't enter it before a certain date. Just all kind of stuff that I've caught somewhere or another. I also keep track of it not just with these cards, but by folding these booklets together or little things so that I can flip through them. That's mainly for the economic phase, because each country has its own rules on here for building stuff and everything. So I want to keep that information there. You know, one thing to note, the one thing that doesn't fit in the economic phase is the diplomacy, the number of diplomacy actions you're allowed to take. That actually happens during the diplomacy phase, and rather than page through all those books, I put an entry on my cards for that. Other stuff that I keep on the cards, outstanding loans, ruler values, including their military values, the army sizes that are on the board, all the different colonies and trading posts and trading fleets. I'm not sure quite where to put discoveries. Keeping track of that on the cards doesn't really make sense, so I usually keep a separate sheet of paper to indicate discoveries, and eventually, after enough turns, they become available to everybody. Anyway, I'll load this one up, and, well, we'll keep playing. Now, I've got to, because I don't play straight through, kind of have some way of marking what I've done and what I haven't. So I'm up to the events phase at this point. All right. And again, there's nowhere to keep track of all this. The only thing there is once you get to the rounds. Onward.